The U.S. military is prepared to strike Iran as early as this weekend.
How could Iran hit back if the U.S. does launch military strikes against it?
They said if the first missile flies, it won't just be Iran answering. They said retaliation would not be symbolic. They said the era of one nation striking whoever it wants is finished. And while Washington prepares strike packages, Tehran just survived an internal power grab from its own elite. But here's what nobody is connecting. The loud warning coming from two nuclear-armed powers and the quiet fracture inside Iran's leadership are unfolding at the exact same moment. And that combination could turn a limited U.S. strike into the opening shot of something far bigger than anyone publicly admits. For months, the narrative seemed straightforward. Iran's nuclear program advances, enrichment levels climb, missile stockpiles expand, proxy attacks escalate across the region, American carrier strike groups move into position, bombers deploy forward, air defense systems reinforce U.S. bases, Washington signals that diplomacy is running out of time, Tehran signals defiance, markets brace. But behind that familiar tension, a new variable entered the equation, not quietly, not subtly, but unmistakably. A top-level declaration from Beijing warning that if American forces attack Iran, China will not remain on the sidelines, that it would commit national power in support of Tehran. Within hours, Moscow aligned itself with that position, framing any strike as destabilizing and unacceptable. This wasn't routine diplomatic protest. It was a strategic line in the sand. Naval movements followed. Open source tracking showed Chinese vessels repositioning. Intelligence cooperation between Tehran and its powerful partners reportedly intensified. Russian weapons transfers to Iran, already underway, gained new urgency. The message was clear: a strike on Iran may no longer remain a U.S.-Iran conflict. And yet, while that external wall of deterrence rises, something extraordinary is happening. Inside Iran itself, according to credible European reporting, a secret internal power struggle erupted at the highest levels of the regime. Not student activists, not underground dissidents, senior insiders, former top officials. Clerical support from influential religious centers, even quiet backing from elements within the security establishment, a coordinated attempt to push aside the supreme leader. It nearly succeeded, but at the final hour, a powerful national security figure refused to join the effort. He sided with the existing leadership. The plot unraveled, alleged organizers were placed under house arrest, power consolidated, and the man who crushed the internal challenge emerged stronger than ever, now positioned as the regime's key negotiator with Washington. Think about that timing. Externally, global powers issuing warnings against U.S. action. Internally, elite fracture, emergency consolidation, crackdowns intensifying. On the streets, protests have entered multiple consecutive days. Women chanting for systemic change. Students clashing with security forces. Universities stormed tear gas. Live rounds reported. The regime showing it will escalate domestically if necessary. Here's the paradox. Iran may be politically weaker inside than it has been in years, but geopolitically it may be shielded more than ever. Why would Beijing and Moscow stake so much on a regime under internal strain? Energy is one answer. Iran supplies massive oil volumes eastward, often outside dollar-based systems. For China, that represents energy diversification and strategic autonomy. If U.S. strikes cripple infrastructure or force a political transformation aligned with Western interests, that supply dynamic shifts dramatically. But this goes beyond oil. It's about precedent. For decades, the United States has conducted military operations with limited direct great power interference. The assumption of escalation dominance shaped strategy. Now, Beijing appears determined to redefine that assumption. If Washington backs down under pressure, it signals that limits exist, and that those limits are enforceable. If Washington proceeds anyway and confrontation widens, it risks validating Beijing's claim that the world is entering a multipolar era where American force can no longer operate uncontested, and Moscow sees advantage in that recalibration. A recently revealed defense agreement between Russia and Iran includes the transfer of hundreds of modern shoulder-fired air defense systems and thousands of missiles over several years. Even if these systems don't decisively stop a large-scale U.S. air campaign, they complicate it, they increase cost, they raise risk, they signal commitment. Meanwhile, Iranian-backed militias across the region have issued their own threats. Bases in Iraq and Syria could be targeted. Shipping lanes through the Gulf could face disruption. Western intelligence agencies are reportedly monitoring signs that proxy networks might activate beyond the Middle East if escalation occurs. One regime supporter abroad even openly spoke of targeting Gulf infrastructure and civilians in the event of war, rhetoric designed to amplify fear and deterrence simultaneously. This is how layered escalation works: military pressure from the outside, internal instability within, proxy networks poised to activate, superpower credibility tied to outcomes. And all of it unfolding as negotiations inch forward with massive gaps still unresolved. Washington demands dismantlement of nuclear enrichment capacity, ballistic missile programs, support for regional armed groups. Tehran signals willingness to discuss nuclear constraints under strict conditions, but refuses to open the missile file or abandon proxy influence. The gap is enormous, and now the man leading Iran's negotiation team is the same power broker who just crushed an elite coup attempt that matters. Because leaders who survive internal challenges rarely compromise from weakness. They consolidate, they centralize, they project strength. On the American side, political pressure builds as well. Appear too cautious, and critics claim deterrence failed. Act decisively, and you risk igniting a broader confrontation. Pentagon planners understand the complexity. Striking fixed nuclear facilities is one thing. Sustaining a campaign in contested airspace potentially influenced by Chinese electronic warfare, intelligence sharing, and missile coverage is another. Supply lines stretch, regional allies hesitate, some governments quietly signal restrictions on how their territory might be used, financial markets are already signaling anxiety, oil volatility spikes with each headline, investors hedge against instability, insurance rates for regional shipping fluctuate because markets understand. A simple truth: once multiple great powers stake credibility in a crisis, de-escalation becomes politically harder. Here's the scenario few openly discuss. What if Washington calculates that the internal instability inside Iran makes this the optimal moment to strike, believing the regime is distracted and vulnerable? What if Beijing calculates that allowing that strike to proceed unchallenged would permanently erode its global standing? What if Moscow views escalation as strategically useful to stretch American focus? Each actor may believe it is acting defensively. Each may believe the other will ultimately blink. That's how miscalculation happens, not through irrationality, but through mirrored assumptions. And beneath all of it, Iran's domestic situation remains volatile. Protests continue, security forces intensify crackdowns, elite loyalty tests unfold behind closed doors. A regime under pressure often becomes more unpredictable, not less. Externally protected, internally pressured. That combination is combustible. If a U.S. strike order is signed, the first explosions may be confined to specific targets, but the second and third order effects could radiate outward: cyber operations, maritime disruption, proxy attacks, economic retaliation. The broader question is no longer just whether facilities are destroyed. It's whether this moment marks a turning point in how global power is exercised. Is this the crisis that proves American force still operates without external veto? Or the crisis that demonstrates a new era? One where major powers openly counterbalance military action beyond their immediate regions. The warning has been issued, the internal fracture has been exposed, the military assets are positioned, and now the world waits to see which side believes the other is bluffing. Because if both sides decide the other won't follow through, that's when history tends to accelerate.